We got all the way to Hoboken before I got suspicious. By then, I'd missed a lot of clues. Vaccinations, passport pictures, packing up 7 trunks, the farewell party, 4 friends who drove us to the train station in their cars, the train ride, the hotel in Hoboken. Previous trips back to Boston hadn't required any of these activities. But I had no reason to suspect another destination. I was only 7. Until I looked out the hotel room window and saw a big green statue of a woman. I knew I'd never seen her before in either of my grandmother's neighborhoods. "Where are we?" I asked Mom. "And where's Grammy's?" "Oh, we're not going to visit Grammy's," she said. "We're going to a place called Ireland." Ireland was across the ocean, she explained. We would sail on a ship for almost a whole week. It would be fun. Not for me, I thought. One of my sisters had motion sickness, and I'd probably be sharing a bed with her. Dad wrote to his brother from the hotel. "Dear judges, we're off to our estate in Ireland. Had intended to do it around August or September, but had a chance for a good booking ahead of time and grabbed it. So the rush. Have a year's leave of absence from the university. Love, Jerome and all." There was no estate in Ireland, of course. Dad had a way with words. He and Mom had gone to live in Dublin 11 years earlier as newlywed students and spent 5 years there. I was an infant when they came back to the United States, and my older brother was 3. Now there were 8 of us heading back across the Atlantic Ocean. The next morning, we boarded the Holland America Line's SS Maasdam and settled into 2 of the ship's 842 tourist-class staterooms. Mom in the larger one with the 4 girls, and Dad down the hall in a smaller one with the 2 boys. All our names were right there on the passenger list. Professor Jerome Judge, Master Robert T. Judge, even Miss Valentina Judge. We could have been grown-ups for all anyone knew, instead of 6 children, 2 of them still in diapers. We children spent many happy hours romping in the playroom. The ship organized activities for the children, along with advice for their parents on how to avoid accidents. Children should not be allowed to run or play unattended. Mom was diligent about following this advice and never let us out of her sight. Despite all the children on board, the ship had not been childproof, and the railings posed a great danger to little ones wandering about without careful supervision. So when we went out, Mom was usually holding the youngest 2 on her lap and watching the rest of us very carefully. We ate all our meals together in the dining room at long tables where Mom and Dad could keep an eye on everyone. I don't remember the food, but I can't imagine that we were especially fond of things like poached filet codfish of Havanaise. Occasionally, Mom and Dad would go to the cocktail lounge in the evening for some adult company. The morning after one of those nights out, Mom was out on deck watching us play when she noticed 2 young boys fighting nearby. A couple standing in front of her were commenting on the brawlers. "Can you imagine traveling across the Atlantic with 6 children, like that couple we had drinks with last night?" the man asked his wife. "No, I can't," answered his wife, "but the mother is standing right behind you. Why don't you ask her?" Mom just smiled at them as if to say, "Notice that none of mine is out there fighting." Dad shocked a fellow passenger the day he decided to test out his new wash and wear suit, which he'd bought just before the trip. So he hopped in the shower, fully clothed, soaked himself and the suit, shook himself off, then stepped out into the corridor where he had more room to continue shaking off the water. A woman was passing as he emerged and stopped to stare. "What happened?" she demanded, fearing no doubt that the ship had sprung a leak. "It's my new wash and wear suit," said Dad. "Isn't it a great invention?" She shook her head and rushed down the hall. After 6 days at sea, the Mazdam sailed into the southern port of Cobh, where we boarded another train for a 4-hour ride to Dublin. Friends met us at Kingsbridge Station and took us to a nearby B&B. 8 years earlier, during their first Irish sojourn, Mum and Dad lived in a guest house in Enniskerry, a village in the Wicklow Hills 20 miles south of Dublin. Before we left South Bend, Mum wrote to Molly Jeffers, the proprietress, to see if she could put us up again. Molly wrote back that she was sick and wasn't taking paying guests. So the hunt began in Dublin to find a place that could accommodate 2 adults and 6 children. A few days later, still homeless, Dad rented a car and drove down to Valclusa for a visit, arriving to discover that Molly had just died. In her will, she divided her estate between her brother Jim and longtime handyman Frank Gray, who had worked there for 25 years. They were trying to decide what to do with the place, which was too big for just the 2 of them. Our arrival presented the perfect solution. We would rent Valclusa for the year. We abandoned the B&B in Dublin and returned to the Wicklow Hills. Andrew and I had no memory of Valclusa, but Mum and Dad felt as though they had come home. Valclusa was built in the 18th century as the dower house for the nearby Powerscourt estate, which consisted of 34,000 acres of plantations, shrubberies, Japanese red deer herds, and a magnificent waterfall. The grounds were used to film a number of movies, including the classic Henry V with Laurence Olivier, and lesser classics like Captain Lightfoot, which starred Rock Hudson in the somewhat improbable role of an Irish rebel. You couldn't see Valclusa from the road, which befitted a property whose name meant secluded valley. To reach the house, you traveled up a long driveway into a gravel-covered front yard, large enough to park several cars and at least 1 child in a playpen. A hedge on the right separated the yard from the fields below, which ran down to the Powerscourt estate. The house was on the left, a low grayish stone building that appeared to be built on 1 level, but in fact was much larger inside, with the living and sleeping areas on the main floor and a complete floor below, built partly underground, where the kitchen, dairy, and storage rooms were located. Since we arrived in June, Valclusa became our playground for the summer. We roamed the hills, watched Frank milk the cows, had snacks on the front steps, entertained visitors, including an occasional priest friend of Mum's and Dad's, wandered around with Jim and Billy the donkey. Apparently Rory had to be restrained on some of these trips, and occasionally hitched a ride in a neighbor's donkey cart to play at the waterfall. 2-year-old Rory was being potty trained that summer and spent long stretches of time in one of the front rooms, sitting on an enamel chamber pot, the same one Andrew had used years earlier. He didn't mind the sitting so much, but hated to miss out on playtime with the rest of us. So he learned to ride the pot as though it were a little car and would scoot around the house, maneuvering himself along by pushing with his feet on either side of the pot and dragging it beneath him. When playtime moved outdoors, so did Rory and the pot. He would drag himself along the gravel driveway, making an alarming noise and scratching the enamel off the bottom of the pot. He loved to wear hats and could often be seen sporting a rain hat or a beret or a Notre Dame cap which he paired with the lederhosen Andrew had worn a few years earlier. One of his favorite numbers was an original creation he put together by draping a dish towel over his head and then pulling an empty shredded wheat cereal box down over his ears. Mum called him the French Foreign Legionnaire. When he wore this ensemble on his travels around the front yard, bare-bottomed on his pot, he was a sight to behold. He had a few other routines, too. May, one of the neighbors, babysat for us when Mum and Dad went out at night. She found Rory rather a handful because she would get him bathed and into his pajamas, then make the mistake of leaving the room. Returning just a few minutes later, she would discover him stretched out on the bed, stark naked, singing 1,000, or so it seemed to her, verses of The Foggy, Foggy Dew.
And the only thing that I ever did wrong was to save her from that foggy, foggy dew.
Or his particular favorite, Come Down the Mountain, Katy Daly. We want to taste your Irish Mountain Dew.
Come down the mountains, Katy Daly. Come down from the mountains, Katy Dew. Oh, can't you hear us calling Katy Daly? We want to